Hello, folks. You are listening or viewing the Deal by Me podcast with Dr. James W. Smith, your host. Today we have with us David Combs. He is a songwriter, photographer, entrepreneur, and author with 4 decades of experience writing over 120 songs and creating 14 albums of soothing, relaxing instrumental piano music. His songwriting began with the now popular standard Rachel's Song. And if you haven't heard it, I trust that you will look it up. Today, I'm just happy to have him with us, and I am certain listeners are going to appreciate his sharing. Uh, Mr. Combs, I hope you don't mind me calling you Mr. Combs or David or whatever you like.
Well, you can call me Dave or whatever, but
All right.
I know you're Dr. Smith, and I appreciate I know it was years and years getting those degrees. Sometimes people don't know what's behind that doctorate, but there's a lot of work goes into that doctorate.
I
But
appreciate
if you
it.
don't mind, I'll just call you James, and you can call me Dave. How's that?
Sounds good. Sounds good. Uh, Dave, I want to say that I'm grateful and pleased to have you share with listeners today. Your story is very, very interesting. Uh, and I have a few questions that I'm going to uh, pose to you, but then at the same time, I want to just give you time to just share and talk to listeners of this podcast. I think you share some very interesting perspectives that I just feel that will benefit listeners of this podcast. Let me just share this to you. Um, One of the reasons that I started my podcast was to continue my ministry as I'm retiring at the end of this year. And I wanted to do something that I thought would benefit others. And so I've titled my podcast, Tell Us Your Story. And hopefully, by doing that, the experiences and events will benefit somebody else. And that's what it's all about. And so as we move along, that's kind of the approach that I like for you to kind of take. And so that somebody else can just be helped as you share with them. So the number one, I know you've written a book, and you was wrote Rachel's Song. So when you first began, just tell us a little bit about that. How you wrote your book, what about Rachel's Song? Uh, like just have you to share a little bit of that with us.
Well, thank you, James, and I congratulations on your long and very wonderful career as minister for over 30 years or coming up on 30 years at your church. I know your congregation loves you and you love them, and that's a wonderful thing. And like you, I grew up my home church was Calvary Baptist Church. That was my home church in Erwin, Tennessee. So I grew up in the eastern Tennessee mountains and around church family that loved music, loved the Lord, and just church was a big part of our life. Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night prayer meeting, and so forth. It was a big part. And for me, as a young kid, my mom and dad both played the piano. My dad played by ear. He didn't read music very well, but he could sure sit down and play about anything. So I grew up around music, and I love music. And in our church, and I'm sure in your church, music is a big part of the worship service. I mean, sometimes when words can't touch somebody, music can. And that's the title of my book, as you see, it's Touched by the Music. Well, music certainly touched me, and now my mission is to continue helping that music to touch other people through programs just like this, with talking to people about my music and how it has changed people's lives, and hopefully it will continue to do so. So I grew up around music. But then my career, though, music was always a kind of a foundation around everything I did. But I got my degree at East Tennessee State University in mathematics and physics. And so I'm a scientist kind of person. So I grew up, my first jobs were around computer programming and information technology and all of that kind of technical stuff. But at the same time, I was also minister of music at my hometown Calvary Baptist Church for my last 2 years of college. And then when I got my first job here in Winston-Salem, North Carolina at Western Electric, which is a big manufacturing company, I also on weekends would be the part-time minister of music at a local church here, Bethany Baptist Church. So I continued my ministry with music, as a part-time part of it. So that continued music on until in 1980, my father passed away. He was killed in a car wreck. And my father was a big influence on me with my music. I enjoyed playing the piano, and he would play the organ, and we'd sing and play duets and all that thing. And so music was my big connection with my father. And when he was tragically killed in a car wreck, it just killed me. It just hurt me so bad. And I think it was that emotion of grieving for my father that following month, he was killed 3 days before Christmas in 1980. And that following January, I'm almost certain that it was the grieving process which led to this pour of emotions came out of me and on through my hands onto the keyboard and the piano, and I wrote this piece of music that had no name, of course, at the time when I played it, but it was a beautiful song, and I enjoyed playing that song. It sounded so good to play it on the piano. And in fact, my wife came home from work one day and she says, "Dave, what is the name of this song that I've got stuck in my head?" You know how you get a tune and you hum it all day long. And so she hummed a little bit of it. And I said, "Well, it doesn't have a name." And she says, "What do you mean? You play it on the piano all the time?" I said, "Well, it's just something I made up." Well, she got all excited, said, "Oh man, have you written it down?" And I said, "No, I'm not going to forget it. It's up here in my mind." She said, "Oh no, you got to write that down, because if something happened to you, I'd never remember that song." So I said, "Okay, I'll write it down." Sure enough, so I've got me a piece of manuscript paper, and for those of you watching, I'm holding up the piece of paper I wrote it down on, and it doesn't have a title or anything. It just has the melody line and the chords. It's in the key of C, very simple melody. And you can see it just says copyright David M. Combs, 1981. So this was around January. So I did write it down. Well, we tried to think of a name for it. The song has to have a name, of course. And I wasn't going to be like Mozart and all those people and just call something Opus 1, Opus 2, Opus 3, whatever. I had to have a name. So we tried to come up with a name. Nothing we ever came up with fit. Then 2 years later, some friends of ours had a little baby girl. Her name was Rachel. And her parents asked me and Linda to be her godparents. So at little Rachel's christening service, Linda and I are sitting there in the church with the family and the minister. It was a private service. And up at the front of the church, in the center of the platform, was a baby grand piano. Well, that caught my eye. And at the end of the formal part of the service, I punched Linda and I said, "Hey, what do you think about me playing this song now as part of this beautiful service?" She said, "That's a great idea." So I went up and asked the minister and the family if it'd be okay if I played a song on the piano. Sure. So everybody sat back down, and I go over to the piano and I sit down and I start playing. And I get most of the way through the song, and I hear in the background some sniffles and clearing her throat. And I noticed that my eyes were getting a little bit moist too. And it was very emotional. A christening service of a beautiful little baby, it's emotionally packed enough. And you add on top of that some beautiful music, it really affects you. So at the end of the song, when I finally finished playing it, I looked over at little Rachel in the arms of her mother, and I said, "From now on, this song will be called Rachel's Song in her honor." James, that's how the song got its name.
Wow.
So
I like that. I was going to ask you that because I said Rachel's song was very interesting, and I'm really hoping that listeners who are hearing you talk will listen to that song because I'm definitely going to pull it up. I had not pulled it up, but I do want to hear it now after just listening to, and reading your bio because it's very interesting. But I also know that it's been played all over the country.
Yes.
And so how were you able to get it into all of the radio stations? And somebody from Winston-Salem just coming up with Rachel's song. How did this, tell me a little bit about this. How were you able to promote it and get it in these radio stations and become so popular with the Rachel song?
Well, James, I firmly believe that God had a plan for this song. First of all, it got my life. It put my life on a trajectory that I had no idea was going to happen. But every time I would play this song, people loved it. And in 1986, I was doing a lot of traveling with Western Electric, doing some consulting with factories all over the country. We had AT&T and Western Electric had plants all over the place. And one of the plants was located in Nashville, Tennessee. And we were cutting over some new software, and I was traveling to Nashville, working all week long in Nashville, come home on the weekends and that kind of thing. And Linda says, well, Dave, you've got this beautiful Rachel song. Why don't you go and get a demo recording made by a professional musician in Nashville? You're right there with all those musicians and studios. I said, okay, I can do that. So one evening after work at Nashville, I go driving around downtown looking for a studio, and it was about 6 o'clock at night, and I was over in the part of town they call Music Square. It's where the Country Music Hall of Fame is, and the RCA studio that you can tour, and then BMI and ASCAP headquarters, and lots of studios, and everything to do with music around that 4-block area there. Driving down this one street called Roy Acuff Place. Now, you may remember the name Roy Acuff. He was a famous Nashville Grand Ole Opry musician, and so they named the street after him. So there's this little side street, Roy Acuff Place, and down at the end of the street was this building that looked like it had a barn-shaped roof on it, and then at the corner of the street, it had a water wheel, one like from an old mill. And so I drove on down, and on the side of the building, it says the Music Mill. I said, well, that's clever. So I pulled in the parking lot, and there was one car parked in there. So I saw a man sitting at a desk through the glass door. And so I said, okay, I've got a live person to talk to. So I knocked on the door, and he came and unlocked it and opened it. And he says, hi, I'm George Clinton. Can I help you? And now it's a different George Clinton than most people think. There's a lot of famous George Clintons, but this fellow was a George Clinton, the recording engineer in Nashville, Tennessee. So he introduced himself, and I told him, I'm Dave Combs. I've got a song that I need a demo recording made of. And he said, I'm looking for a studio to record it in. He said, well, come on in. And I said, well, I've never been in a studio before. And as I stepped in the door, I looked in the lobby, and around the walls of the lobby, over here on the left was a huge, bigger than life-size picture of Glenn Campbell. Here's a great big panorama picture of the group Alabama, which everybody loves the music of Alabama, and the Forrester Sisters, and there's gold records and platinum records plastered on the wall all around this place. I thought, whoa, I think I've arrived at a first-class place. So George says, I said, I've never been in a studio. And he said, let me give you a tour. So there's nobody recording right now, which is unusual, but there's nobody here right now. So let's go over here in Studio A, the big studio. I said, okay. So we go in and we enter this big music room. You could put an orchestra in that room. It was huge. Over in the back corner was a concert grand piano, and there were little, what they call isolation rooms around the room where singers and drummers or whatever can play. And he says, come on into the control room. So he goes over to this big door that's about, 6-8 inches thick, soundproof door, and he pulls on the handle, and it's a big door to open. So we go in this control room. First thing I see is the console, the control console. That thing must have been 8 feet long. I later found out it had about 32 tracks on it that you could record. And around the walls were all these tape recording machines, and they had this soundproof big picture glass window where the engineer could sit there and look out where the musicians were playing. Big speakers mounted on the wall on each side of the window, so they call them big monitor speakers. I said, "Wow, George, this looks like something from NASA. You could launch a spaceship from in here." So I said, "How much does this place cost?" And he said, "Well, it's $125 an hour plus engineer." Well, this is 1986. That was a lot of money back in then, a lot more than I made. Well, he probably saw how disappointed I was in that figure, and he says, "Well, don't worry, Dave." He said, "The fellow who owns this studio owns a tiny little studio across the street in formerly a little rent house that they converted into a studio, and it's $15 an hour plus engineer." I said, "That's my speed. I can do that." I said, "Okay, George, now all I need is a musician to play my little song. It's just a piano player. I need a good piano player." He thought for a second. He said, "Hey, I know just the person. His name is Gary Prim. He and I go to church and Sunday school together." He said, "He's a great person and a wonderful musician." He said, "Let me go look up his phone number for you, and I'm sure he'll do a good job for you." So we went back to his desk, wrote the number down, looked up his phone number, wrote it on a piece of paper, gave it to me. I thanked him and got back in my car, and I couldn't get back to the hotel fast enough to call Gary, because now remember, you say, "Well, why didn't you call him on your cell phone?" Well, folks, this was 1986. Cell phones hadn't even been invented. The internet had not been invented. I couldn't Google anything. Google didn't exist. So I go back to the hotel, get to my room, pick up the landline, and call Gary's number, and got his answering machine, left him a message to call me back. And in about 30 minutes, the phone rings, and it's Gary. This is another one of those God wink moments where I'm talking to a person for the first time in my life that will later become an important part of the rest of my life. Yeah. So it's one of those, I call them God winks. It's to borrow a phrase from Squire Rushnell, who wrote this little book called When God Winks. You've probably seen it. He calls it a God wink when things are, you call them a coincidence, but there is no way in the world that could be a coincidence. It was, God had something to do with it.
I hear you. I hear you very well.
I know you've had many of those God winks in your life.
You better believe it. I noticed also that you wrote a book entitled "Touched by Music," and I do see it in your background. And what was that a result of Rachel, or did you do that after Rachel? I'm just trying to figure your sequence. Was that an inspiration to sing that, to write that book following your writing of the Rachel song?
Yes. Remember, I wrote it in 1981, named it in 1983, recorded it with Gary Prim in 1986. And then since then, I have written and recorded with Gary Prim over 120 songs that I've written, and we've recorded over 170 songs because I've done some of my favorite hymns and Christmas music and that kind of thing. So in that whole period of time from 1986 till last year, I had received over 50,000 letters and notes from people all over the world telling me how much my music had touched their life. I literally have, James, I have boxes full of these letters down here in my basement. And most of them, you better get a Kleenex out when you're reading it, because they will really touch your heart and soul. And so those letters and notes were really the impetus for me finally, after people telling me all these stories that I've got about my music, they said, "You ought to write a book." Well, the pandemic came along, and my wife and I were sitting there on the sofa, kind of like maybe you and your family are sitting there and saying, "Well, now what am I going to do with everybody? We can't go out to eat. We can't, church services are now going virtual, and you can't go visit relatives. You're kind of locked into your being homebound, basically." And my wife looks at me and she says, "Well, I don't think there's any time better than the present for you to sit down and write that book we've been talking about for years." And so I did. And so I pulled out all these letters and started rereading the letters I've been getting. and writing down some stories about my journey with my music from childhood on to today. And I ended up with, I think, a very inspiring book. And along the way, I got to meet a gentleman by the name of Jack Canfield. He's the guy who was the co-author of the Chicken Soup for the Soul books.
My wife loved those books. She's got almost every one of them.
Well,
she right up on the mantle. They're sitting right up there. She loves them. Every morning she'll get up and read something in one of those books. I start reading one. I haven't read the complete one yet, but I always look at it because she's always talking about it. So I know Chicken Soup for the Soul. Yeah.
Well, part of the process of thinking about writing my book, I knew I needed some help.
Okay.
I know you've written some books, and writing a book is quite an undertaking. You can write something down, but somebody else needs to help you along to make it sound good, and not just the grammar, but the flow of it and all it, the design, the cover, all of it's a pretty complicated process. Well, when I was looking for some help, I had the opportunity to spend about 3 days at a retreat with Jack Canfield. Well, during the first thing I did when I met Jack was he listened to Rachel's song, and he not only listened to it, he listened to it twice in a row. He said, that song is absolutely phenomenal. He loved Rachel's song. And then I was telling him my stories about my music and my journey and my thoughts about my book. And he said, that is wonderful. You need to write that book. He said, and I'll help you. I said, okay, great. So, and then when I asked him at the end of our discussion, I said, well, now, if I write this book, will you write the foreword to it for me? And he kind of chuckled and he says, well, Dave, you write the book first. I said, okay, Jack, I will. So I did write the book, sent him the draft of it and everything. He loved it. And I'm so honored that Jack Canfield wrote the foreword to my book. So when you read my book, you can read what Jack thinks about me and my music and my stories. But that was another little God wink when, who would have known that I would ever meet somebody that's really a writer's hero to me. I love all those Chicken Soup for the Soul books. And here I get to meet Jack, and he and I become friends. That's just an amazing story.
It is. Let me ask you this, because I want to know, and your story is so interesting. So tell me what would you say to listeners who may be going through something themselves, how to do certain things, or down and got some problems that they're trying to work out, in terms of your experiences? And obviously you've had quite a few, and you've had to wink plenty of times. So I just kind of tell us a little bit about what listeners can, or how they can benefit from your story.
Well, there's many aspects to it, but the one central thing I think that if I had to sum it up was that I didn't try to do everything by myself.
Oh, wow.
And like you with yours, I'm sure when you hit kind of a roadblock, well, I don't know what should I do next? Well, there's almost always somebody that you can pick up the phone or email or text or whatever and say, I know you know 10 times more about this than I ever will. Can you help me? And most of the time people are going to be willing to help you. So my first advice is don't try to solve all your problems yourself. Whether it's a real serious problem you're dealing with, obviously you need to talk sometimes with your minister, your pastor, your family friends, your doctor, whatever, but you need to reach out and expand that circle of people around you that will support you. And the same thing is true with whether it's an entrepreneurial idea that you have. You've been thinking about, maybe I should do this. I have this great idea for a product or a service. I don't know what to do with it. Well, don't just sit there and think about it all day long. Take some action. That's one of Jack Canfield's things of his. He wrote a book on it. In fact, the book is called, I have it right here beside me, Jack Canfield, The Success Principles. One of the main principles, if you could boil it all down to just about one, is take action. don't sit there and think about it all day long.
Right.
Take some action
Well,
and
sir.
reach out to people. Expand those people, your circle of influence and circle of friends. They will help you. And if it's a musical situation, like in my case, I reached out and I found this Gary Prim, a wonderful musician in Nashville. And it led to us doing 14 albums of music over, many years, and a lasting friendship that's more like a kinship than a friendship.
Mm-hmm.
He's like a brother, and it's just a wonderful thing. But you reach out and find somebody that you can partner with and will help you. That's my main advice.
I love that advice. And I hope listeners will take that to heart, because we sometimes do get depressed, we're down, and we don't know that to reach out just to ask somebody, just to share, is really a blessing within itself. So I just want to thank you for sharing that. What about your own challenges? Have you benefited from some experiences that you've gone through yourself? Just curious.
Well, I've been really blessed that I haven't had any serious health issues or that kind of thing. No major financial crises or whatever.
Mhm.
And so I'm blessed in that, and I'm so blessed to have a wonderful wife, Linda, who we've been married 52, going on 53 years.
Beautiful.
And it's a wonderful relationship that we just we bounce things off of each other. We complement each other very well, and she is an amazing person. You'd love to talk with her. She would do a wonderful podcast for you, because her career is totally amazing. She has worked for 3 different U.S. presidents. She has 9 confirmations for jobs that she's had, 5 Senate confirmations in Washington and 4 in North Carolina. She's worked for 2 North Carolina governors and has just retired as the controller for the state of North Carolina down in Raleigh. And so her name is Linda Combs. You can Google her and you'll find a whole lot more about her probably than me. But so I'm blessed to have a wonderful wife and family. And we have no children, but the 2 of us, but we have tons of children who have adopted us over the years. We call them our kids, but people that have worked for us in various capacities, or friends and young people. We love young people and seeing them blossom in their lives and their careers.
Dave, I'll be very frank. This has been an awesome interview. You have shared so much. I love the way you've talked about your music, and I trust and hope that listeners will listen to the Rachel song, as I'm going to definitely listen to it. I hope that they will look and get your book, Touched by Music, because I can feel it. I know exactly the feel and how you dealt with that. So again, I just want to thank you for agreeing to this interview today. And I know that listeners are going to truly be blessed and will benefit from your sharing. And there you have it. Dave Combs,
Let me just
songwriter. Yes, sir.
let me just ask people to tell them where they can easily go to listen and read more about it. Listen to
All
my
right.
music. Just Combs Music. It's my website, combsmusic.com. It's a very simple website. When you go there, right in the middle of the page, there's a link that says Play Rachel's Song. When you tap that button, it's going to play the original song that was recorded in 1986. And my book's there, my CD's there, but just go to combsmusic.com and everything you need to know is right there in front of you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I was going to kind of close with that, but I appreciate you giving it to us, and we appreciate it so very much. Again, thank you again for sharing with us today. And I don't know how much to say, except I'm grateful, and I do appreciate it. Again,
Thank you, James. I'm grateful, and God bless you. God bless you too, James.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.